History operates on a brutal, consistent logic. When a king is defeated, his legacy is erased, and his followers scatter to survive. In 15th century Korea, King Danjong was deposed as a teenager and murdered by his own uncle. To ensure his memory vanished, the new king ordered his body dumped in a river and strictly forbade a royal burial. Hung-do, a local official, chose to ignore that order. In the middle of the night, he secretly recovered the body and buried the young king in the mountains, using the burial garments he had prepared for his own mother. The risk was total. If the new king discovered this act of loyalty, he wouldn't just execute Hung-do, he would wipe out 3 entire generations of his family. Risking the annihilation of your children and grandchildren for a dead, powerless ruler is a rare historical anomaly. It goes against every instinct of political survival. We see this same anomaly in 1st century Jerusalem, where a man condemned as the King of the Jews was led to a public execution. At first, the predictable pattern held true. The disciples who had spent years following Jesus, even those who swore they would die with him, fled the moment he was nailed to a cross. Left unattended, his body was destined for the standard fate of a Roman criminal, left for scavengers or thrown into a common, unmarked trench. But just as the body was about to be abandoned, 2 men emerged from the shadows of the city to claim it. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were not common laborers. They were wealthy, influential members of the Sanhedrin, the council that pushed for this execution. Why did the vocal disciples go into hiding, while these 2 powerful politicians, who had spent years keeping their faith secret, suddenly risked everything for a corpse? They were racing a deadline. Jesus died at 3 p.m., leaving them just 3 hours to secure and bury the body before sunset, when the Sabbath began and all work was outlawed. By acting publicly, they were choosing social and political exile. They were essentially resigning from the council, surrendering their wealth and marking their families as targets. Joseph took the first risk, walking directly to the Roman governor Pilate to demand the body of a man executed for treason. While Joseph secured the permit, Nicodemus hurried to gather burial supplies. He returned with 70 pounds of myrrh and aloes. This shows the scale of his contribution. A standard burial used less than a pound of spices. Nicodemus brought 70 pounds, an extravagant amount worth roughly $200,000 today. People do not spend a fortune and destroy their careers to clear a troubled conscience. You use a common grave for that. These 2 men were treating a criminal with the honors reserved for a king. Instead of being left to decay or thrown into a common pit, the body was wrapped in clean linen and carried away from the site of the execution. Joseph placed him in his own family's tomb, a pristine, expensive space carved directly into the rock that had never been used. Crucially, they did this without the hope of a resurrection. As far as they were concerned, the man they followed was dead, and his movement had failed. They spent their reputations and their wealth to give a cursed man the most honorable burial possible, fully expecting him to stay in that tomb. To understand what changed them, we have to look at what they saw. While the disciples were in hiding, Joseph and Nicodemus were close enough to watch every minute of the execution. They saw a man who didn't fight his captors or collapse in terror. He walked to the place of death willingly. They witnessed a composure that didn't match the environment. Instead of screaming for mercy, he spoke to the women in the crowd and promised paradise to a dying thief. Most remarkably, he didn't curse the men murdering him. He prayed for their forgiveness and spoke to God as his Father until his final breath. While the fleeing disciples saw a humiliating defeat from a distance, Joseph and Nicodemus saw a man die with a dignity so concentrated that it forced them to take a side. Watching this death didn't destroy their hope, it confirmed their belief. Seeing how he treated his enemies and how he addressed God convinced them that he was exactly who he claimed to be. This observation is what turned secret followers into public martyrs. They were no longer afraid to let their faith be known, because they had seen something more compelling than the power of the Sanhedrin. Early records suggest they paid the full price for this choice, losing their positions, being cast out of the synagogue, and spending the rest of their lives as exiles. Their stories suggest that true conviction isn't born from witnessing a victory. It's found in the courage to recognize the truth in a moment of apparent defeat and the willingness to risk everything to honor it.